Have you ever asked a question that felt like opening a door you weren't sure you were ready to walk through? That's what it felt like when Lukas Meyer, a 26-year-old filmmaker, held his grandfather's final letter under the yellow light of his apartment desk lamp. The letter was old, creased, almost brittle, but the last line felt alive, like it was whispering right into his ear. Never go back to Hürtgen Forest. Why would a man who hardly spoke of the war write something so desperate? Lukas stared at the sentence for what felt like hours. He read it again and again. A warning, a plea, or something else. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay awake imagining the forest, dark, endless, and holding a secret his grandfather had carried in silence for 70 years. By sunrise his mind was made up. Whether or not he was ready, he was going to open the door. Hurtgen Forest was nothing like the photos he'd studied online. It wasn't just trees and soil. It felt alive. The air was cold, thick enough that Lukas's breath drifted out in slow clouds. Tall firs towered above him, their branches sagging like they were tired from carrying the weight of forgotten memories. The deeper he walked, the quieter it became. No birds, no rustling animals, not even the sound of wind. Just stillness. So still that Lukas felt as though the forest had paused to watch him. He stopped by an old wooden sign covered in moss, barely readable, a scar of a past era. As he sketched notes, an elderly shopkeeper from the nearby village had warned him earlier. This forest remembers too much. Loud things happen everywhere, but silent things, those are the ones that stay. Lukas didn't fully understand, but the silence of Hurtgen was already gnawing at him. Lukas wasn't new to interviewing older veterans. He'd done dozens of interviews for his documentary series, but none prepared him for the reaction he got when he mentioned Hürtgen Forest. His first interviewee was Herr Eberstadt, a man in his late 80s with clear eyes and a warm handshake. They talked casually about service, rationing, wartime songs. But when Lukas gently asked, "Did you ever serve near Hürtgen Forest?" everything changed. Eberstadt's expression froze, mid-sentence. His eyes looked past Lukas, through the wall, as if he suddenly saw something that shouldn't be remembered. He stood abruptly. No goodbye, no explanation. Just 6 trembling words. "I survived 44. I won't revisit it." And he walked out. The next 3 veterans reacted the same way. One cried. One left the moment Lukas said, "Hürtgen." Another whispered, "Not that place. Never that place." Lukas realized his grandfather wasn't the only one haunted. After 4 failed interviews, Lukas was discouraged. He sat in his small hotel room, rubbing his eyes, ready to abandon everything. Then, a notification. A simple text message from an unknown number. "If you truly want answers, come to the old chapel by the forest at dawn. K." He stared at the screen. He had not contacted anyone with a name starting with K. Who was this? A prank? A warning? Or the one person willing to break 80 years of silence? At dawn, fog wrapped the forest like a veil. The chapel stood small and crooked, its wooden roof dark with age. Inside, a single figure sat on the front bench, a thin man, long white hair, knotted hands. When Lukas approached, the old man looked up with eyes that carried storms. "My name," he whispered, "is Konrad Vogel. I was 19 when Hurtgen swallowed my world." Lukas clicked record. Konrad didn't start with dates or tactics. He started with a confession. "We were children," he said, "boys who played football one month and held rifles the next." His voice trembled, but not from age, from memory. He described the forest in 1944, rain that lasted weeks. Mud so deep it stole boots off men's feet, trees that burst into splinters when shells hit them, splinters like knives. People imagine soldiers fighting bravely, he whispered. But in Hurtgen, everyone was afraid. The Americans, the Germans. No one wanted to be there. The forest wanted no one. Lukas felt a knot in his throat. Konrad touched his own chest. Every step we took, we stepped closer to death. And the worst part, you didn't hear death coming. In that forest, it was the silence that killed. Konrad's expression softened as he spoke the name, Matthias Richter. He smiled faintly. A farm boy, strong hands, soft heart. He believed that no matter how dark the world became, you could always create a little light. Matthias carried a harmonica, small, metal, dented. He played it during the quiet moments, Konrad said, sometimes just a note or two. But it reminded us that we were human, not machines, not monsters. Though shells often fell and ammunition ran low, Matthias insisted on sharing jokes, warmth, optimism. He saved my mind, Konrad whispered. Not with a weapon, but with hope. Konrad fell silent for a long time before he continued. Then he said, I remember the day the forest took him. Their unit had been ordered to move through a ravine, an exposed, deadly path. Snow fell gently at first, settling on their helmets, the world strangely peaceful. Then the sky exploded. Konrad described artillery raining down like fire from the heavens. Tree trunks shattered, men screamed, earth shook. He and Matthias ran, stumbled, crawled. The ravine became a death trap. When a shell hit near us, Konrad said quietly, it knocked me off my feet, and when I lifted my head, Matthias was lying in the snow. His legs were crushed beneath debris, blood stained the whiteness around him, but Matthias still looked up with a faint smile. Play something, he whispered. Just play. Konrad's hands shook so violently that he couldn't even lift the harmonica. The shelling intensified. Konrad saw explosions creeping closer, tearing through trees as if the forest itself was being ripped apart. Matthias grabbed his sleeve with surprising strength. You must go, he rasped. You have to live. Someone has to tell them. We weren't monsters. Konrad shook his head, crying, choking, refusing. But Matthias pushed him away. His last act of strength. Konrad ran through fire, through smoke, through hell. When he looked back, another explosion consumed the ravine. He never saw Matthias again. I promised I'd tell the world, Konrad whispered. But I never did. I never had the courage. Konrad's eyes locked onto Lukas's. You asked why German veterans still shudder, he said softly. And I'll tell you, he leaned forward, because we remember the people we left behind. We remember the boys who never got to grow up. We remember the helplessness, the guilt. He swallowed hard. And some of us feel the forest still calls to us because it knows we left pieces of ourselves there, pieces we never got back. Then he added something that chilled Lukas to the core. The forest is not done with those who walked away. That night, in his hotel room, Lukas spread out the items on his desk. His grandfather's dog tag, the old photograph of his grandfather's company, Konrad's recorded testimony, and the letter, the one with the haunting final sentence. As he reread it, something strange struck him. A line he had always skimmed over suddenly felt like a clue. Forgive me for leaving him there. Leaving who? His grandfather had never mentioned any friend, no war stories, no names. But something else didn't add up. The black and white photo of his grandfather's unit. Konrad was in it. Same uniform, same unit symbol, same year. His grandfather had been in the same place, the same battle, the same nightmare. And suddenly, Lukas realized his grandfather might have known Matthias too. The darkness of the forest had swallowed more than Konrad's story. It had swallowed a secret inside his own family. The next morning, Lukas couldn't sit still. Konrad's story had shifted something inside him, something that felt like destiny and dread tangled together. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to look. Back in the forest. Armed with a metal detector, gloves, and an uneasy heart, Lukas walked into Hurtgen just as dawn painted the sky soft pink. Hours passed, metal scrap, rusted canisters, nothing meaningful. Then, near the ravine Konrad described, the detector beeped loud and sharp. Lukas knelt, brushed away soil, then moss, then a clump of tangled roots. Something metallic glinted beneath. A dog tag. He lifted it carefully, almost reverently, and read the engraved letters, Matthias Richter. His breath halted. His hands trembled. He wasn't just hearing Konrad's story anymore. He was holding it. But then a question hit him like cold water. Why was it here? If Matthias had died in the explosion, how did his tag end up so far from where Konrad thought he fell? Unless someone moved him. Someone who tried to save him. Someone Konrad didn't know about. Someone like Lukas's grandfather. Lukas practically ran through the village streets, burst into Konrad's home, and held the tag out like it were a holy relic. Konrad, sitting by the window with a blanket around his shoulders, looked up. When he saw the tag, something inside him broke. He reached out with quivering hands, touched the metal, closed his eyes. "No," he whispered. "He never took this off. Never." Tears streamed down the old man's face. "Where did you find it?" Lukas explained everything. The ravine, the soil, the shock. Konrad listened silently. When Lukas finished, Konrad reached behind him and took an old photograph from the shelf. A unit portrait. Konrad pointed at two faces, himself. And next to him, "Your grandfather," he said. "Karl Meyer." Lukas had never seen the photo before. His grandfather had burned most of his war belongings. Konrad's voice cracked. "I should have told you sooner. I think your grandfather was there that day. Closer than you know. Maybe even closer to Matthias than I was." The room felt tighter, the air heavier, as if the forest itself had followed Lukas back. Konrad wiped his face with the back of his trembling hand. "There's something I never told anyone," he whispered. "Not even my family." He took a deep breath as though preparing to unlock a memory sealed for decades. "I didn't die from the blast that hit our squad," he said. "I was knocked unconscious. Hours later, when I woke up, the fighting had moved on." He paused. "I crawled, half frozen, back toward the ravine. I needed to know what happened to Matthias." Konrad's eyes glassed over as if he were reliving it. "I didn't find him where I left him. But I did see something else." He gripped the arms of his chair. "A soldier dragging another body under fallen branches, trying to shield him." Lukas felt goosebumps. "I thought it was an American at first," Konrad whispered. "But then I saw the uniform, German, and the face." He looked at Lukas, his voice barely a breath. "It was your grandfather." Silence swallowed the room. "He was crying," Konrad said quietly, "holding Matthias's hand, whispering something I couldn't hear." Konrad's lip trembled. "And then I passed out again." Konrad reached into a drawer and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When he unfolded it, a small harmonica lay inside, dented, bent, but intact. "Matthias's," Konrad said. "I found it months after the battle, buried near a medical tent. I always suspected someone carried it there." He looked at Lukas firmly. "Your grandfather didn't abandon Matthias," he said. "He saved him. He dragged him out of the ravine. He took him to medics. He stayed with him." Konrad's voice broke. "He was there when Matthias died." Lukas clutched the harmonica. "How do you know?" he whispered. Konrad closed his eyes. Because Matthias's tag was missing when I searched, and now you found it where your grandfather must have picked him up. A painful truth crystallized. His grandfather hadn't been warning Lukas to stay away from the forest because it was dangerous. He warned him because going back would force Lukas to uncover the guilt he carried for 70 years, a guilt he couldn't forgive himself for. That evening, Lukas returned to Hurtgen. This time, he didn't bring equipment. He brought the harmonica. Finding a spot overlooking the ravine, Lukas sat on a fallen tree. He held the harmonica to his lips. He wasn't a musician, but he remembered a simple melody from his grandfather's journal, a few soft notes scrawled on paper long ago, a lullaby, a prayer, a promise. He played it slowly. The melody drifted through the branches, echoing across the ravine like a fragile ghost returning home. For the first time, the forest didn't feel oppressive, didn't feel angry, didn't feel haunted. Instead, it felt like it was listening. A breeze swept through the trees, rustling the branches in a gentle, almost tender rhythm. Lukas closed his eyes. In that moment, he felt, deep in his chest, something soften, as if the forest wasn't just remembering. It was finally letting go. Lukas stopped playing when he heard slow footsteps behind him. He turned. Konrad stood at the edge of the clearing, leaning heavily on a cane, his breath fogging lightly in the cold air. "I heard the music," Konrad said, voice shaking. "I followed it." He approached Lukas, eyes brimming with tears. "You brought him home," he whispered. "You brought both of them home." Together, the two walked toward the exact spot where Lukas found the dog tag. Konrad knelt, despite pain, despite age, and placed the harmonica gently on the forest floor. "We leave this," he said softly, "so their souls know they are remembered." Then Lukas planted a small wooden cross he'd carved earlier. Not a grave, but a sign of peace. Konrad reached over, took Lukas's hand and squeezed. "Thank you," he whispered, "for letting an old man finally breathe." Back at the chapel, Konrad sat quietly while Lukas packed up his equipment. After a long pause, the old man spoke. "Young people think history is a list of battles," he said. "Places, dates, numbers." He turned toward Lukas. "But real history is carried inside people, in the secrets they bury, in the love they lose, in the things they regret." He placed a hand on Lukas's shoulder. "We fought, yes, but what mattered was not how we fought. What mattered was how we held on to our humanity in a place designed to destroy it." His eyes softened. "You listened. That alone heals what this forest took." For the first time since Lukas met him, Konrad looked truly at peace. Lukas spent the next 6 months editing the documentary. It wasn't easy. He cried more than he expected. He paused footage of Konrad's interviews so many times the spacebar nearly wore out. But he crafted something honest, something human, something his grandfather would have wanted. When he released it online, he thought maybe a few thousand people might watch. Instead, millions did. Veterans from all over the world wrote to him. "I finally understand my father's silence. I grew up fearing my grandfather. Now I want to talk to him. I thought I was alone in my guilt. Schools requested screenings, museums asked for rights, counselors used it for therapy sessions. The story of Konrad, Matthias, and Karl Mayr became more than a documentary. It became a bridge, connecting generations, healing wounds, allowing long-silenced voices to be heard." Months later, when the rush of success faded, Lukas sat alone with his grandfather's final letter again. The ink looked the same, but its meaning had changed completely. Before, the last line felt ominous. "Never go back to Hürtgen Forest." But now Lukas understood. His grandfather didn't write this because the forest was cursed. He wrote it because he was. Because Hurtgen held the memory of the one friend he couldn't save well enough, because guilt had trapped him, choked him, haunted him. His grandfather's plea wasn't about fear. It was about protecting Lukas from inheriting his pain. But instead of drowning in it, Lukas had transformed it. Years passed. Lukas visited the forest each autumn, always placing a small wooden carving near the ravine. Konrad joined him the first year, then the next, until his legs grew too weak. On one visit, a young student approached Lukas and asked, "Why do German veterans still shudder when they talk about Hurtgen?" Lukas looked out over the quiet trees. "It's not just because of the violence," he said softly. "It's because of what they lost there. Friends, youth, pieces of themselves." He took a breath. "But they also remember moments of courage, of kindness, of humanity, when the world tried to take that from them." The student nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Lukas smiled faintly. "And sometimes," he added, "the bravest thing a soldier ever did wasn't pulling a trigger. It was holding a dying friend's hand so he wouldn't leave the world alone." He looked up at the canopy. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, soft, almost warm. The forest no longer felt haunted. It felt grateful. And for the first time since 1944, Hurtgen wasn't a place of shuddering. It was a place of peace.